Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I have a great friend of mine, Rob Minkoff, a prolific director of Stuart Little 2 and Haunted Mansion. Of course, Lion King is a big movie that you did and that is following you everywhere.
Yes, it was big.
I mean, it's great. I mean, through all of your experiences at Disney to Lion King.
Sure. I have a great story,
Yeah.
which really began years and years before that. When I was 15 years old, I was doing a production of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs at the Palo Alto Children's Theater.
Okay.
And I met someone who we became very good friends. His name was Kirk Wise. And then years later, Kirk would end up directing Beauty and the Beast, and I did Lion King. But at that time, which was very interesting, I was asked to babysit these two sisters, Jenny and Emily Shapiro, and I went over to their house, and on the coffee table was this beautiful book called The Art of Walt Disney with an embossed picture of Mickey Mouse, and I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen it before. I opened it up. I said, "Where did you get this book?" It had all this amazing artwork from all the Disney classic films. And they said their uncle wrote the book. Wow. Their uncle was named Christopher Finch.
Wow.
And they were actually in the dedication. So Jenny and Emily's names appear in this book. And so I went home to my parents. I said, "You've got to get me this book." So for my next birthday, they bought it for me. And then when I went to Cal Arts a few years later, I brought it with me and found out all of the students there owned that book. Wow. And they all had a different story about how they got it. And I went to Disney, of course, after 3 years. And then many, many, many years later, I was doing Lion King, and the producer comes into the office, Don Hahn, who you know
Yes.
very well from the Haunted Mansion. Don Hahn walks into the office and says that we're going to have a book written called The Art of the Lion King, and it's going to be written by Christopher Finch. Wow. So we go to the first meeting, and I walked up to him and I said, "It's really an honor to meet you." And he said, "You know my nieces, don't you?" Incredible story.
Incredible story. Yeah. Wow. It's all kind of comes
Yeah.
together.
It's the circle of life.
Seriously.
Yes,
yeah. And here we are, us.
And here we are, exactly.
Which is so wonderful. After so many years of working together, this is such a pleasure and honor to have you here and to talk to you about one of my favorite characters that I had to dress, Stuart Little.
Yes.
And it was such a great meeting, I think, from the beginning. And we know a friend, Jason Clark, who was the producer on the film.
Yeah.
Who brought me into the room, and
Yes.
I think what was so interesting because I got to see the Stuart Little 1, and it was such a great movie. I mean, it made, I think, over $500 million. Worldwide, or who knows?
In today's dollars.
In today's dollars, but it was a huge hit, and it was such a heartwarming story, about this mouse living with humans, and
Right.
everybody bought it.
Yeah.
And then here's Stuart Little 2, and here I am, read the script and got to come to meet you. How do you now reinvent this character?
Right.
And I had no idea what you were thinking.
Sure. No, it was very interesting because we'd sort of set a style in the first film, and you came in and you kind of really wanted to give Stuart a makeover. I think you actually gave me the same makeover. You were like, "Rob, you need to, do something about how you dress, and I can help you."
No more Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah, no more Hawaiian shirts. So he said, "I really feel that Stuart should be handled in a very different way than we did in the first film." And of course, it was a big struggle to do it because it was all done in CGI.
Yeah.
And creating clothing in CGI has a huge number of complications and difficulties that you had to face.
Yeah, and monetary, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Creating one shirt for Stuart Little would be like $100,000.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Now
it's the biggest costume budget
ever.
Ever. And of course, that was relatively early in the relatively early days of computer animation.
Yes.
And yet, the normal things that you would do when you would create a costume, obviously, in the real world, were very second nature to you. But suddenly, you had to deal with the limitations of how do you get a computer to do what you want it to do, or how do you get an artist at the keyboard to understand how to create the appropriate, the look, the cut, make sure everything fits in a proper way.
Absolutely. The color, the texture. Yeah. It was so interesting because I have the sketches actually that I brought to the first meeting, and I wanted Stuart to look like Prada, that he's wearing Prada.
Was this the first meeting? So
yes.
You showed me this before I gave you the job.
Correct.
So, okay.
Correct.
So this was the basis on which I hired you.
Correct.
That's amazing. I can't believe you still have these drawings.
Skateboarding boy,
yeah.
which we ended up doing a skateboarding scene.
Yeah.
And his little, city look with low slung pant and.
Yes, you definitely hipped him up.
I had to dress Stuart into the scenes that I didn't know where they're going to be, in a sense. So I had to find out, what counter is he going to be on? Where is he going to be walking? What will be the, street pavement color? All of that stuff really I had to take under consideration.
Sure. And did you, I mean, obviously you must have worked closely with Bill Breschke.
Very closely, yeah, on everything. I mean, color palette of the apartment, what is going to be, I mean, the kitchen counters, every tile, I mean, even when he was going down the drain, what is it going to look like?
Right.
What kind of textures we're going to have against the yellow raincoat that he wore. Right. So yeah, I think, not only for Stuart, but for the real actors, what Gina is going to wear in the scene, what color palette will be her clothing. I mean, Bill is very collaborative, and it was really nice to, I think all of us, in the film, because it was so complicated. There were so many different elements that had to come together to make it right. I think, and you had a great vision because you really were so precise. I mean, what I got from the first meeting, you said to me, I want him to look like he went to the Gap. This is a twill pair of pants,
right.
with a hoodie, with a sweatshirt. I mean, any kid on the street now or then wears these little, shorts with a T-shirt. I mean, his little pea coat for the date.
Yes. Although I have to say, I really wanted to have him skateboard without the helmet.
I know.
I was.
It was so tough. Well, it took me about, I think, a week or 2 weeks to design the helmet because, I mean, the head was, very difficult.
Right, and you wouldn't want the helmet to kind of take away from the shape of his face. Right.
Which is one of the worst bodies, I have to say, I dressed in my entire career.
I'll tell you something. It was the biggest challenge because if you look at the original illustrations, Stuart looks nothing like a mouse at all. He's not really a mouse. He's a human with a mouse head.
Okay.
And he's incredibly skinny.
Okay.
Which, of course, you would have liked better,
yes.
perhaps, using all those pieces.
Interesting.
But we made him look enough like a real mouse so that it felt like, okay, he could possibly be a real mouse. And I'll tell you something, after people saw the first movie and they visited the set, they were like, where is Stuart? Like, he's got to be around here somewhere. Like, didn't you just film him? Like, doesn't he? Like, where's his trailer? Like, he's in there somewhere. And we're like, no, it's all created in CGI.
Yeah.
He doesn't really exist.
Yeah, it's puzzling. I think it's puzzling because even, I get questions. It's like, do you have a maquette? Do you dress, do you make the clothes in real fabric? No, you never did.
Right.
We truly...
But he did definitely, but he ended up with a kind of a quasi, he's not the most mouse-like mouse. You know what I mean?
No.
But mice are definitely...
Yes.
Round and usually a bit,
Well, he had very short legs.
Yeah.
And, the big feet, of course.
Yes.
Giant, like a little tummy, of course. And no shoulders and, like, thick neck, almost no neck.
Right.
And then the big head. So, yeah, the challenge really was how do you design, costumes for this body that look human?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, when you said to me, I really want him to look like he goes and... just went to Gap with the mom and bought the clothes. It had to fit that certain way, So it was very interesting making the patterns, just like for a human actor, that you make the shirt, make the T-shirt, put it together, and then, of course, the computer sews it onto the maquette, 3D maquette.
Right.
Then we come in and try to adjust it.
Right.
And I think that's where really the art comes. I think in that process of really tailoring in a computer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's like I said, obviously when you approached it for the first time, this was not something that you had done before. And so normally when you're working with a seamstress,
exactly.
you look at the cut and how it it lays against the body and all the rest of it, and it's such a big challenge to do it when you're doing it in the computer.
Because you're communicating with other artists.
Do I get an assist?
May not necessarily know how the fabric moves, how it.
Yes. And I remember that was definitely your attitude about it. You were like, these people don't understand clothing.
Yeah.
Like, and you know how you could tell that?
Yeah.
Just by looking at them.
Yes. Flip-flops, baggy jeans.
These people did not dress like they really, you could have made over everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think it's so interesting because, a lot of times I get asked, okay, everything is going such CGI, and, will there be ever a moment where costume designer is not really part of the process? And I tell students we will always be part of the process.
Sure.
Because we really know the fabric, we really know the cut, we really understand how has to move,
Sure.
On a body. I mean, this is a three-dimensional character that still has to walk. I mean, we had a lot of issues with Stuart pants. I don't know if you remember, when the fabric was so wobbly. Mm-hmm. So we had to actually stiffen the fabric from knee down,
right.
and give it a different property so it just didn't kind of
right.
flop as he was walking.
Right.
And, what was really challenging, I think, is it really was the number of changes that we had for him. I mean, it was 16 changes. We had the pajama, which was kind of predominant thing, which we made in different colors. We had the soccer outfit. I mean, the backpack that we had to design that he unzips and actually, puts his hand in, which was another $70,000 just to unzip it.
Right.
But I want to talk a little bit about the proportion, because I think that was a very key thing for me when I was working with you. How do you really find the right texture on the costume? Because, if you do one-on-one, like, for example, in the zipper of the hoodie, if the zipper is human size is so giant. When
right.
it's his size is so little, you can't really see it.
Right.
When we did the knitted sweaters. So I think it's kind of like a collaboration of the eye, of human eye and ours. Like, how do you really find out what's right?
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you've wrestled with this a
well,
lot.
Yeah. I mean, again, you think about if you were going to actually create a piece of clothing for a mouse using human scale fabric, the scale is going to be much different than
Yeah.
the mouse.
Yeah.
So it would look much bigger in a way and much more
doll-like,
clumsy.
and almost doll-like,
Sure.
which I think we were trying to avoid.
Well, yeah, I think
Yeah.
you wanted to make it look like he had, tiny little, seamstresses working,
Yes.
to create his clothing for his body. So everything would have to have been mouse scaled.
Yes.
The threads, the literal threads.
Exactly.
The everything would have had to have been that. So it looked natural on him. So it
Yeah,
looked
I mean
believable.
the stitching. I mean, what was really interesting, where we had to really go into details of the pockets.
Right.
Seam on the pants. I mean, it really was incredibly like to the tiniest little piece.
Sure. Yeah.
that-
But animators love that attention to detail.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And the thing about animation, which is interesting, so something that Hans Zimmer pointed out to me when we were working on Lion King, he said, animation is so different than live action, because in live action you look at the frame and you see things that weren't meant to be there. He would always describe it as, a cigarette butt in the street.
Right.
Like, nobody put that there intentionally, but he said in animation, there's nothing that you have there that wasn't
That's
done
true.
on purpose.
That's true.
So every frame, every inch of every frame is done. And I think we were trying to use that same approach in the film Stuart Little, even though it was live action. But we're trying to make the whole thing seem like a unified fantasy world that had its own perfection.
Right. I mean, to a point where I had my separate budget just for shoes, because what we did, we shot so much of the footage by people's feet
Right.
prior to seeing Stuart in the scene. I couldn't have just extras in completely destroyed, horrible shoes. So
Right.
we made sure that every shoe that we saw on the screen was actually dressed by us.
Right. That was an interesting thing. I remember Bill Breschke, the production designer, talked about that on the first film. Because he said it occurred to him that so much of the movie is going to be shot with Stuart on a floor or on a table, and so what are the textures going to be everywhere? Because everywhere you have to get these close-up textures that look rich enough to make it believable.
Yeah.
So the shoes were exactly that same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one conversation with Bill where we had Stuart on the kitchen counter, and we were talking about his costume was already designed, and it was a yellow soccer T-shirt with his shorts. Yeah, this was quite amazing. I think one of the most difficult outfits that I had to design and execute, the raincoat.
Yeah.
I mean, just even the texture and the reflectiveness of the material was a big deal. Everything that has to be lit. My other favorite character was Margot, of course. It was so funny because when I first came on the film, they showed me a little like a maquette. It was actually a clay sculpture of Margolo, and it looked like an old man with a pipe and a scarf and like, in a woolly, I don't know, hat. It was completely not what I imagined that Stuart would fall in love with.
Exactly. Well, you did a good job feminizing her.
It was really fun. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
really, it was like Amelia Earhart was our, inspiration for her.
Exactly.
So the leather helmet that kind of turned into the hair with a little bob, with the pink lining, with the pink gloves, and but again, communication with the computer guys who were able to really understand how her scarf flows, how the silk moves in the air, what does the knot looks like, so every detail going along with what Stuart would wear, to making sure when she's with him together, again, when she's in the scene inside the house. I love that when we were talking about her, and you always mention, how you wanted her to be flirty.
Right.
And I think you went to great lengths of having the eyelashes in a certain way.
Right. Well, it was exactly because it was one of those things where you start with a bird and you're trying to make the character look as much like a bird as possible, but give some human qualities that, allow you to kind of relate more to the anthropomorphic aspects of the character. And so the eyelashes were definitely something that kind of made her look a little, a little cuter.
And girly and
girly.
feminine and fun.
Yes. I think it's important to note also that she was played by Melanie Griffith.
Yes.
Whose mother, Tippi Hedren, was actually in The Birds.
Pretty
I don't
amazing.
know why. I just had to mention that.
Pretty
I don't know
amazing,
why.
yeah. And her voice is so feminine as well. It's super soft and cute and adorable. So I think we wanted to understand that they fell in love with each other. There's some little connection between the two of them.
Yeah. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when Stuart and Margolo are in the car watching the movie.
The date.
Yeah, they're on their date and they're watching. They're actually watching a Hitchcock film, and obviously getting the rights for that was a trick. But I'm so happy with the way that scene turned out. I think it's really one of the best moments in the film. And animated films actually transcend that really well. So an animated film, a Disney animated film made in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, you can still look at it and watch it, and there's something that still seems kind of fresh and about it, and it doesn't really date as much. So we were really trying to kind of give New York a sort of timeless quality, and to make New York a sort of character in the piece. I think that was actually one of the things that was very important to us.
Yeah, it was really fun to kind of give Gina a specific look, which was very timeless. My inspiration was 1940s, 1950s. Also working with her body, a tall, broad shoulder. How can we kind of give her more of a feminine, mom look, and also really work with the color palette. Again, working with Bill and you to kind of really creating this, fun world. So every, screen, every moment, it really speaks, and it's bright and fun. Like the little cherry apron, the orange sweaters, the yellow coat that we did with her. Always looking at the interiors and the exteriors together. It was such a great opportunity, and us meeting on that film, it was just amazing. And it's great it continues to this day, which is fantastic. Thank you for coming.
Of course.
Thank you, everybody.